is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
More than half of Africa's population have no access to electricity. That's according to the International Energy Agency. The agency adds that 75% of the world's population without access to power live in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, among them countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Niger and South Sudan. While major strides in power connectivity have been made over the past decade, the deficit is still glaring in Africa, having massive limitations on socio-economic development. So what is the cost of power shortages in Africa? And what solutions are being looked at in bridging Africa's energy gap? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Let's begin with this chart here. It is from the latest multi-agency energy progress report chaired by the United Nations Statistics Division. Findings indicate that 759 million people lack access to electricity across the world. 570 million of these people are in sub-Saharan Africa. This accounts for at least 75% of the world's unelectrified people. The report indicates that less than half of sub-Saharan Africa's population is connected to the grid, against a global average of 90%. Now, electricity coverage as a percentage of the population in the region ranges from lows of about 7% in South Sudan to highs of 99% in Mauritius, so it is a mixed bag. Countries like Kenya, Senegal, Ethiopia and Rwanda have all recorded significant gains in the past decade. However, 20 of the least electrified nations in the world are also from the sub-Saharan region. Now, here's why these numbers are disturbing. The total lack of access or unreliable power supply has grave implications for you and me. Electricity runs life-saving equipment in hospitals, from oximeters, bedside monitors to ventilators, items that are all too familiar during this time of COVID-19. Even COVID-19 vaccines require ultra-cold storage to be delivered where they're needed the most. Power supply is crucial to supplying clean water to homes, to schools and businesses. Energy powers industry, which translates to mass employment. The correlation between electricity and education is also a long-established fact, and certainly electricity powers technologies that connect people. And finally, here's an interesting image of planet Earth from space. It is a famous photo captured by NASA in 2017 showing the lights of human activity at night. If you look at the various regions around the world, North America, Europe, Central and Southeast Asia is highly lit up. Some fair activity in Central and South America as well, but not as much in sub-Saharan Africa. And to help us shed more light on this subject, I'm joined via Zoom by Dr. Victoria Nalule in Kampala. She's the CEO of Nalule Energy and Mining Consultants and is also an author of the book Energy, Poverty and Access Challenges in Sub-Saharan Africa. Andrew Mupuya is in Mukono in Uganda as well. He's the director of Yearly Paper Bags Limited, a manufacturer of eco-friendly paper bags. And in Johannesburg, South Africa, I'm joined by Ted Bloom. He's a partner at the consulting firm Mining and Energy Advisors South Africa. Thank you all for being on the program. Dr. Nalule, if I may start off with you, according to the annual SDG 7 tracking report, Sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 75% of the world's population without access to electricity. First off, do you agree with these findings, and what is the general picture of electricity reach in Africa?
Thank you very much, Beatrice, for the invitation and for having me on this precious program. So the issue of energy access, because the SDG 7, that is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 7, emphasizes access to electricity. And basically, I do agree. When it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, lots of people lack access to electricity. According to the data, over 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa have have no access to electricity. And to make matters worse, most of the people, especially in rural areas, they do rely on traditional energy. Because when we're talking about energy access, as it's stipulated in SDG 7, we have to differentiate between modern energy and traditional energy. And this distinction is very key because at the end of the day, you find that over 80% of the population in Africa, they
Right.
are relying on traditional energy, including charcoal, firewood for cooking, candles for lighting, and this has various negative impacts, including air pollution, indoor air pollution, because we see estimates in some African regions like Southern Africa, the SADC region,
Right.
showing that over 200,000 people die every year due to indoor air pollution. So I agree with the estimates that most of the people in sub-Saharan Africa don't have access to electricity. But however,
All right.
when we're talking about SDG 7, we have to also be very clear on the role of energy generally.
Let me just come in there and get the view from the other panelists here, because Ted, 600 million people in Africa, that is quite a large number. It does seem that there are many challenges still lying on the way to accessing electricity in African countries. What, in your view, are the most significant obstacles, particularly for countries in sub-Saharan Africa?
Okay, so I think it's a catch-22 situation insofar as you've got poverty and energy poverty, and the one drives the other. If you're poor, you probably can't afford energy, and if you don't have energy, you remain poor. So that's why there's a massive role for DFIs and governments to intervene and to facilitate the development of energy availability throughout the continent, in fact. So uh, I think without the other challenge, sorry, the other major challenge is the paucity or the lack of density of the populations. Typically, when the rural population is the majority, it's very expensive to try and establish a grid to small villages around the country. And especially if they don't have much economic activity, they then firstly have a very high cost of distribution, and secondly, there isn't money or free money or capital flows
Right.
to actually pay for that distribution network. So it's really a catch-22, and I think the only way forward is that we need people with vision and some money to invest and say, well, we're going to kickstart this thing. If it doesn't get kickstarted, nothing's going to happen.
So, Ted, I want to look at South Africa's situation, because South Africa has had major challenges with its energy sector. I mean, being one of Africa's most advanced economy, this is a rather strange situation to be.
Yes, I mean, it's a diabolical situation because I was part of the energy corporate in the previous regime prior to 1994, and I've been back twice since then. And the way the organization was run previously as a non-profit, state-created organization, and the way it has now been run since 2001 as a for-profit corporate company is like chalk and cheese. What has happened is since it's been corporatized, the sole shareholders, the government, and as you know, the government's ruled by one party, and that's the ANC. And what they've done since 2001 is they've deliberately used our utility as a vehicle for not uplifting the economy, but for self-enrichment and self-aggrandizement.
Right.
So what's happened is they've used it to deploy their cadres, and they've also used it as a piggy bank. Since 2001, you've gradually seen the increasing in corruption to the extent now where Eskom's back has been broken by the level of corruption.
Right. So, Andrew Mupuya, your thoughts here, because when we talk about 57% of Africa's population being without electricity, this has major implications. As a business person yourself, what are the implications for real life situations, particularly for business?
Thanks, Beatrice. The biggest power problem we have in Africa, I think, is majorly high cost. The high cost, it begins right from the point of installation. The cost of connectivity is, if I talk for the case of Uganda, the process of connecting, power connection is really very slow and the cost is high. You find, like what Victoria mentioned, accessibility is a big problem. You find when the people have made a payment and it takes even more than 6 months to be connected. So that largely impacts on the performance of any business. Let's say if someone wants to do installation towards their projects, and then blackouts all the time. Like I'm in manufacturing, and largely to run an industry, you
Right.
need a standby generator. Without that, you'll not be able to have sustainable production just because of power blackouts that are always frequent. And that has largely impacted on many small scale enterprises that cannot afford an alternative source of income like high power generators.
All right. Dr. Nalule, I mean, there seems to be solutions on the one hand, but it does seem that the challenges are quite overwhelming. But I do want to go back to the SDG 7 report, because overall the number of people without electricity worldwide has dropped, but not for Africa. Due to the population, the deficit in Africa has increased by 14 million, at least, from 556 million people in 2010 to 570 in 2019. What does this say about the pace of developing energy infrastructure versus the population growth rate?
Okay, thank you very much. First, we have to understand that energy infrastructure, they are very expensive ventures requiring massive capital from different countries, especially foreign countries. So in recent years, we've seen that most African countries have been relying on fossil fuels, including coal, for electricity generation. But due to the 2015 Paris Agreement and the SDG 13 on climate change, we're seeing a reduction on infrastructure development, especially for fossil fuel projects. So this is affecting African countries in that we are saying on one hand, we have to tackle the challenge of energy access. We need lots of investments to come into the country. We need investments for energy infrastructure, including grids, including transmission lines. But remember, electricity, when we're talking about electricity, you have to think about the sources of that electricity, which is mostly conversion and unconversion, that is fossil fuel and renewables. So if we are seeing a decline on investments in fossil fuel projects,
Right.
that is also going to affect our various efforts to tackle the challenge of energy access. Because remember, all the capital we need, most of the infrastructure we need in the country, we have to rely on international investors. And if international, we are seeing a decline on fossil fuel investments, it's going to affect us. But nevertheless, we are also seeing lots of investments in renewable energy infrastructure. We are seeing lots of infrastructure developments in solar energy, wind energy, hydropower. But the population growth on the African continent is expected to increase. We're moving towards urbanization because estimates show that urban growth rates in Africa are the fastest worldwide.
Right.
So we're saying that in 2050, we are expecting more than 900 million people to be in urban centers. With urbanization, we need lots of energy, not just electricity, because you also have to think about energy or electricity for industrialization.
Right.
What are the people in industries going to use? What about the hospitals? So the issue of energy access, like I was saying previously, it's very key in tackling all the various challenges we are facing,
Right.
including the healthcare, because when you're looking at the SDGs, you'll see SDG 3 on healthcare. But how are the hospitals?
Let me just jump in there, Dr. Nalule, because you've raised an interesting point about the cost of electricity and connectivity. Ted Bloom, you know, when you look at the numbers from sub-Saharan Africa, when it comes to the cost, it is among one of the highest, costs for industrial electricity tariffs. For instance, it is estimated at about 20 to 50 cents per kilowatt, compared to the global average of 10 cents kilowatt. So how exactly is this the case for Africa? I mean, not many people then will afford electricity if access and the cost is still a major issue.
Okay, and you're 100% right. Affordability, especially with lower rural economic activity, is just a lose-lose situation. So I think, I mean, it's very difficult to tell people to just wait a while because, we only live once and the years tick by. But let me tell you this, that forget about renewable energy, because for most people, yeah, it's adequate for household use and so on. But certainly, it's very questionable for industrialization and for industrial use, as we've seen here in South Africa, in terms of mining and smelting, where you need predictable or dispatchable power. But we're on the cusp of a major revolution in the generation and cost of electricity. And it's already started in some parts of the world. It started in the USSR, or the old USSR, where virtually every village has now got its own generation, or is busy getting its own generation capacity. The same thing is starting to happen in China. And I guess with the smaller scale embedded generators that are now becoming available, we are fast moving away from the legacy mega projects that, for instance, have driven Southern Africa. I mean, in Europe, even though they've been electrified for many years, they still have many modules of 100-odd megawatts. In South Africa, our average new size generators are 800 megawatts. The problem with 800 megawatts is very expensive. It takes very long to come online. And when it breaks, you lose a large portion of your power. And that, from a risk point of view, is just a no-no. So I think we're on the cusp of new technology,
right,
hydrogen technology, and that will make power, and if it's localized, so you don't have a grid, you don't need a grid and transmission and all that. I think we are on the cusp of a revolution in the energy sphere.
Right, we'll leave it there for now, but we'll take a short break, and do stay tuned. We'll be right back in a moment.
Electricity supply is erratic. Sometimes it goes well, and sometimes it just switches off, and they give us excuses that something has triggered off, and then we don't see it in 2-3 days.
It's very often we don't have electricity, and sometimes it's not just due to the actual provider of electricity in our country, but it's also due to our municipality not having fixed the infrastructure. I wasn't able to work last week Friday for the very simple reason that this whole block did not have electricity.
It was very tough at the beginning, with power cuts every day and often several times a day, but now it's much better. Outages affected our lives. It had caused damage to electric equipment in the house and the food. It affected the children and old people.
Sample of views there on this topic from Africans in different parts of the continent. Let's now continue our discussion with Ted Bloom, Victoria Nalule, and Andrew Mupuya, our panelists on this subject. Andrew, I want to explore some of the available options if Africa is to meet its deficit. Are there out-of-the-box solutions being developed or being upscaled to enable the continent come to terms with its energy challenges?
think the most viable option would be tackling into renewable energy, because Africa is a continent which is blessed by a lot of sun time compared to other continents. We don't have, say, like in sub-Saharan Africa, we don't experience winter periods. So we largely receive the sun from this January to December. So I would think we need to largely look into solar energy to help produce on as an option. It will actually force the hydropower generating companies to lower their cost or to look at better options compared to them being monopolists. I've already been approached by some companies which want to put in prototypes of their solar toolkits.
Right.
One company approached me 2 weeks ago, and their approach is to have connectivity that will allow the factory to operate on both solar and hydropower at the same time, and the cost of power would reduce by more than 50%. And I really saw it as a very brilliant idea. They have already tried it at the Coca-Cola plant,
Right.
my neighbors, and I'm also giving them a go ahead to set up another prototype at my factory.
So, Dr. Nalule, there are other areas, though, that the continent is exploring to meet its deficits. And I want to point out the Grand Inge Dam, which is, if completed, will be the world's largest hydroelectric plant, as well as the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, which is the largest hydroelectric power plant in Africa when completed. Do you see these projects enabling Africa to meet its energy deficits?
Like we mentioned, like also Ted mentioned, when we're thinking about powering Africa, we have to utilize all the available energy resources. So we need lots of those projects, not only in Ethiopia and not only in Kenya, because I know so Kenya has lots of projects with respect to wind energy and solar energy. We need such projects in different African countries, but we also need infrastructure development, not only for conventional energy, because I've worked with the East African community at the energy department in Arusha, Tanzania, and I had a chance of visiting one of the biggest solar companies there. It operates in Tanzania, Kenya, Rwanda, and we're also expanding to Uganda. And they had done lots of projects with respect to rural electrification for solar panels in different rural areas in Arusha. But one of the challenge, like Andrew mentioned, the issue of affordability. It does not only stop with hydropower, but also with solar energy. Because like we mentioned, most of the people who lack access to electricity, they're in rural areas. So how can we ensure that there is accessibility? That is the instance where we have enough infrastructure to ensure that people have access to that energy, but also the issue of affordability. Can that electricity be affordable? And one of the challenge I actually saw with this solar energy company in Arusha is that they could give people solar panels for a limited period of time, and then they had to pay in installments. But when a family, because remember, these are poor communities, poor families in rural areas, when a family defaults to pay the full amount within that limited time, they will take away all the solar panels. So the issue is, how exactly are you addressing the issue of energy poverty or electrification in such communities when if within 6 months they've failed to pay the full amount, you're going to take your solar panel back? So when we're talking about energy access and how to tackle the challenge, we shouldn't look at only one source of energy as a solution. We have to explore all the sources of energy. We have to explore and invest in all the various energy infrastructure. Because remember, Europe did not become developed within a decade or 2 decades or even a century. They have been relying on all the energy resources they have in their country to tackle the issue of energy access.
All right, Ted Bloom, I want to get your final thoughts on this, and particularly what you think is the future and potential for energy growth in Africa.
Look, I think that one must be very careful. I mean, as Andrew's just intimated, it's no use you have the resources on your doorstep and they're not reliable and the systems don't work. But I'm very upbeat. I really think that, I don't think it's, traditionally this has been an area for government and DFI sort of investment and so on. With the new technology that's around the door, around the corner, the investments will be much smaller and much more affordable. And you know what? I don't think there's one country in Africa, in South Africa included, if not the leader, that stands as a bastion of investment and caring for its people. It seems to me all the governments in this continent suffer of some malaise. As soon as they get to power, they can't give up the power, or the money disappears, or something happens like it's happening here by us. And I think the time is right. If we can micronize the solutions and then roll them out fast, the private sector can do that. And I am very upbeat that the market is there. So that's the first constituent. The technology is around the corner. That's the second constituent. And thirdly is you need enabling. And that will be private companies who will then have the appetite because if they engage in this market, other markets will open up for them. So they need to be alert and willing to want to invest and not just plunge Africa into further debt and misery. It needs to be somebody that's capable and has sincere intentions. And I think that's the big watchword for us as Africans, is we get ripped off by every Tom, Dick and Harry who comes to visit our continent.
Andrew, you have the final word on this. I want to hear your thoughts on what you think is the future and potential for energy growth on the continent.
The future should be bright. The fact that we are blessed by nature, especially in Africa, we are blessed by nature, so we don't have an excuse to lag behind in terms of power connectivity. And this is a stepping stone to industrialization. Because as Africa, we are having a lot of importation of finished products. As a manufacturer, I would think investors, entrepreneurs, and government largely need to look into power connectivity as a priority, and this will boost industrialization on the continent, and it will reduce on importation of products we get from other states.
All right, what a lively discussion. We'll leave it there for the moment. And that's it for this week on Talk Africa. We'd like to thank our guests for their exhaustive insights on this subject. Dr. Victoria Nalule is in Kampala, CEO of Nalule Energy and Mining Consultants, also an author. Andrew Mupuya is in Mukono in Uganda. He's the director of Yeli Paper Bags Limited, a manufacturer of eco-friendly paper bags. And from Johannesburg, Ted Bloom, partner at the consulting firm Mining and Energy Advisors South Africa. Now, we'd love to hear your views on this subject. You can engage with our social media platforms on Twitter and Facebook, and also catch this and more episodes of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. See you again next time on Talk Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.